I'm so glad you're here with me. My name's Kristy Rice, and I am obsessed with watercolor. And today I am taking questions. Your burning questions about watercolor painting in general. I'm a mixed media artist as much as I am a watercolorist. So, what has been driving you insane with your creative journey? What specific subject matter thing have you wanted to try painting that you just aren't sure how to approach? Is there something about your creative habits that you want to change and you're not sure how to come at it? So all questions today are on the table. I want to hear it. Now, obviously, we're not going to be able to get to every question, but Kelly is going to go ahead. And I said this on Instagram when I was preparing for this live. I said, I'm going to paint it out for you. So if it's a question that can actually be solved by showing you something, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm super jazzed, super pumped. Get those questions coming, get those questions coming, and then keep them coming. So Donna says, my biggest issue is getting the right ratio of water and paint. I'm going to hit that one first. Let's go down to the painting table, friends, and let's talk about water control because, oh my gosh, water control. Huge, huge, huge question. All right. So did y'all see this? This one I posted recently. Anywho, I'm easily distracted, friends. So water control is a question that I get again and again, and good thing because water control can make or break a painting experience. Today, friends, I'm going to be using my Art for Joy's Sake palette, of course, and anything else that kind of feels appropriate. And then I'll get this sprayed down. Okay. So water control has to do with kind of the core techniques. I call them WOWed. And friends, if you are here and you are Team Replay, hello. We love you. We welcome you. We are so glad you're here. And please get into comments and ask questions. We'll do our best to get those questions answered. So just head into comments, hashtag Team Replay, and we're so thrilled you're here. So the core techniques, WOWed, wet on wet, wet on dry, wet on damp. And let me just say this, wet on damp, I believe is the number one most ignored technique, and it has to do with water control. All right. So wet on wet, you've got a wet page, you add wet color, right? Depending on the brand of paint, depending on how much water was on your page to begin with, depending on how much water was on your brush when you laid down the color, you're going to get different effects, right? Then you've got wet on dry paper, right? Same thing. You could go wet on dry and not have a lot of water on your brush and get a really kind of scratchy effect. This is wet on dry, but so is this. All right. Now, wet on damp. What I'm going to do for this, and I promise I'm going to get to a little bit more specifics of water control because I realize right now I'm just showing you basic techniques, but I'm dampening the page and I'm going to let that dry a little bit. I want to get this to a truly just damp state. Okay. So here's the thing, water control. It really depends. You have to figure out like, what is your goal when you're touching down paint to the paper? And your goal is, what do you want it to look like? Do you want the color to be really strong and kind of more coverage? Or do you want the color to be very kind of soft and sheer, right? So, and you might be thinking, well, it's watercolor. Of course I want it sheer, but this is what we need to understand. Watercolor can be put on a page in what we call mass tone, which is full coverage, right? When we're doing traditional swatching, for example, friends, we do a swatch that goes from mass tone to fully sheared out, right? And of course, as we go more sheer, there's more water on our brush and there is more of the paper showing through. Mass tone is just that, full tone, full coverage, less water. You're going to struggle to get full coverage if you have too much water on your brush. So that brings me to the other consideration. First, what's your goal, right? Second, water control. What is your struggle? Okay, so if you are experiencing a struggle with watercolor, I would say 8 times out of 10, it's going to be because of your water. All right, now let's go back to our damp page here and let's look at the difference. Wet on damp. Look at that. You get this gorgeous, easily to diffuse a brushstroke kind of effect with wet on damp. And then let's talk about control. Wet on wet is going to be the least control. Least control. It's going to be wild. It's going to feel chaotic. The colors moving, the page is wet, right? Wet on dry, so WOD, is the most control. Kind of. Because once you put wet on dry down, it's harder to move it around, right? So, but generally speaking, wet on wet is the least amount of control on the paper. Wet on dry is the most amount of control. Now, wet on damp is the beautiful in between, right? Beautiful in between. Let me know, friends, in comments, is this helpful with water control? Is this helpful? So let me go back to what is your struggle? If you are feeling like, for example, you're in the middle of a painting and you're feeling like things are just heavy, you're not seeing that lightness, you're not feeling that whimsy of watercolor, you probably don't have enough water on your brush, too much coverage of paint, right? If you are painting and you're just feeling like you're not getting any detail or depth or contrast, you might also have, or contrastly, have too much water on your brush. You can't get any kind of definition because the page just won't dry. All right. So always think about what is your goal? What is your struggle? And then go to wet on dry, and never, ever, ever forget wet on damp. Okay. How do you avoid hard edges on wet? This is such a good question, and it is water control. All right. So let me show you. I had really pretty decent water control here, right? Because you're so far in the drying process. This is not fully dried, but you're getting that nice transition. I'm starting to get a hard edge right here. And that probably, usually where you're getting a hard edge, it's where one area transitioned into another and they're butting heads because one area has more water, one area has less. You didn't keep that water transition even. So you can correct that. Obviously, you can go back over and blend with a just damp brush, right? So let me show you. Let me try to purposely get a hard edge. And of course, now that I'm trying to do it, I probably won't be able to. I'm going to start with like basically no water and get a little more on there. And then I'm going to really load up here and, right? So I already know I'm going to get cauliflowering here. Kelly, keep that question up on the screen. I don't want to forget it, from Sarah. The blooming, you're getting the blooming here. So notice here, up here, I started with very little water. And then I immediately confronted this area with a lot more water, right? So what you're going to get right in here is either a hard edge or really weird bloom or cauliflowering effect, right? So let me just mark this out. So down here was a lot of water, a lot of H2O, and up here, not a lot. And they're clashing, right? So that is usually why you're getting hard edges, because you just didn't have a smooth transition from wet to dry, right? how much water is damp. You want a page is damp, in my opinion, when it doesn't look shiny, but you can tell that the page isn't dry. So it shouldn't look shiny necessarily, but you should be able to tell a difference in texture between a completely dry area and the damp area. Hopefully that was helpful. I see Kelly says, where do I get your tin of paint? I'll have our Kelly, go ahead and pop that QR code up on the screen, but also all the links to my supplies, my tin of paint here. Everything is in the description. How do I stop my painting looking less like an acrylic, even with wet on wet? Okay, Judith, let me know what paint you're using and what paper, and then I'm going to be able to answer that question. Kelly, keep an eye out for Judith's response, and I will be able to more fully answer that question. Okay, cool. So like I said, Kelly, all the links are in the description below if you're curious. All right, so we're waiting on the answer there about the paper and paint that she's using. And let me see about another question we've got here. Let's see, keep your questions coming, friends. Are there times when you want hard edges? Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me show you an example actually with the same color. I did this recently. And friends, if you are watching on your phone, you're obviously not going to be able to utilize that QR code. We know that. But if you're watching on a TV or on your desktop, you can just hover over that QR code with your phone's camera app. Otherwise, the links are in the description below. All right. So look at these. I mean, I purposely, I knew I was going to get all of these hard edges, these cauliflowers, but my painting was more simple, and I knew that they'd be kind of a cool effect. So I left them. So yes, there are certainly going to be times when you want hard edges. The hard edges or the blooms, leaving those is going to give your painting a more spirited vibe, a more kind of edgy vibe. So know that. But yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I love this. Try using yes. I love that. I said advice for painting waterfalls. I love that. Climate has a lot to do with your wet on wet and your wet on dry. So something to keep in mind. Advice on painting waterfalls. Okay. So I have a tutorial on Craftsy all about painting a waterfall. The biggest thing to know with a waterfall, let me see if I can do something from memory here. My Craftsy course, I painted a waterfall in Iceland. Don't even ask me to try to remember how to pronounce it. But the biggest thing with waterfalls, with watercolor, is that you want to, this is a time, you know me, I'm mixed media. I'm all about like using, white paint, bringing white paint in, okay? But when I paint waterfalls, I really like to really utilize the white of my paper. Now, friends, I'm doing this from memory. So you want to think about what is the largest basic shape that your waterfall is making up, right? Right here. I am my waterfall from memory. So look at the shape that the entire flow of water is making up, and leave that shape white. Does that make sense? Leave that shape, the paper, right? So right here, this is my shape. It's kind of a triangle, right? Now, obviously, there's other details that are going to go. It's actually like a trapezoid, very elongated trapezoid, okay? There are other things that are going to go into painting a waterfall. There's going to be little details. There's going to be little sprays of water curling down over rocks and things like that. But my biggest advice would be just that, to really, the first thing you want to save or block in when you're painting is that shape of the full flow of the water. The other thing that you want to keep in mind with waterfalls, and friends, I'm no expert in landscape painting, but I've done my fair share, is that bottom of the waterfall, there shouldn't be a ton of hard edges. You want to exaggerate the fact that there aren't hard edges, because what happens at the bottom of a waterfall? The water literally like hits the bottom, bounces off of rocks, bounces off of the water that's pulled down below, and creates a mist that sprays back up. So we want to kind of get that vibe of that mist. All right. Just going to block in a quick sky here so you can really see. The other thing is that the top of a waterfall is not flat across. It has a bump. It has some shape to it. Okay. So those are my 3 tips. You want to block in your basic shape, right? You want to make sure that your bottom is kept light and billowy and airy. And then you want to make sure that the top, where your waterfall is the skinniest, where it's coming over the rock cliff or over the mossy edge, whatever it may be, that it's a little rounded on top in most cases. Now, obviously, when you're in the moment painting from a photograph or you're painting on plein air, there are circumstances that would make it maybe dip in the middle or things like that. But this is just a general approach. Was that helpful, friends? Let me know in comments. Just say helpful or yay or something, and let me know how you're feeling about this kind of live and this kind of information. Carly says, could use some advice on how to master negative space and creating white in illustrations. For example, white clouds in a sky or white blooms in a bouquet of flowers. Well, I just love that. I'm using some super duper cheap paper today because I knew I'd be going through. But let me tell you what, I'm going to plug this paper for a minute, okay? I recently did a little TikTok on Target's Mondo Llama watercolors. And I bought one of their sets. It was $10 and it came with this watercolor paper, friends. I am trying to track down who makes this because it is pretty darn decent. Let me tell you, it's decent. Anyway, okay. So, white space. What we need is kind of a reference image to discuss white space. I honestly think the best thing would be some kind of reference image. So I have a pile of whatnot here, and I see you're going to hear some noise because I'm like dropping things on the floor. This is live. All right. So I'm going to pull out my botanical Bible. I love this book so much. You guys want a sneak peek of something I've been working on? I'm working on a whole tracing thing. Now, maybe by the time you're watching this team replay, this has already been live. But yes, I did trace over top of my book page. And yes, I'm okay with it. Anyway, okay. White space. We could actually do something with this. So the first thing that I would consider when you're the question really is, how do I effectively save my whites? Have you heard that term before, friends? This is Columbine, I think. Is this Columbine? Bottom, Columbine. Yes, Columbine hybrid. Wonderful. So when you're saving your whites, that's what it's called. Traditional watercolor. You want to save those whites, okay? My biggest tip would be to sketch a little. And that is really loose watercolor. Saving your whites and not sketching can be really, really overwhelming. So for example here, and I'm using an HB pencil, but I am not going to be pressing hard at all, okay? And for obvious reasons, because I do still, like my goal right now, I'm just going to make up a goal, is that I want this to feel loose and light and airy when I'm all done, right? So I don't want to get super duper dupes detailed with my pencil sketch. But what I am doing is blocking out. I know that these petals here in my Columbine, I want them to remain white. And because I'm sketching them in and giving myself the comfort of that structure, so when I go to put brush to paper finally, I know where I need to kind of stay away from, right? That's really my best advice for saving your whites. Now, as you get more comfortable, as your skills kind of evolve, right? You're going to get to a place of comfort where you can save those whites by going straight in with watercolor, right? that's going to get more, that's going to become more easy for you as you evolve in your journey. But don't force that on yourself if you're a beginner, because you're going to start to feel frustrated. So now I can go in here, I'm using my 1/2-inch dagger, and I can start laying down some really strong reds and feel confident that I am saving my whites. I know where I'm supposed to be. And I don't have to be super detailed. I can do really whimsical strokes here, right? I can still have that loose, modern kind of watercolor feel. Obviously, you could use masking fluid. I am not a fan. But this works great. This is a great way. So just very briefly, lightly map it out where your white should be saved, right? Hopefully that addressed that question. Let me know in comments if you have any more kind of follow-up questions to that. And we'll have Kelly pop the next question up. Kelly, thank you so much, because I'm painting and talking. I'm not really like watching that screen. So, okay. Judith said, how do I stop my painting looking less like an acrylic, even with wet on wet? I was hoping for a follow-up, but Judith, I'm going to go ahead and, oh, here we go. She's using Arches and Winsor & Newton Professional. Perfect. I see that now. Okay. So my guess, just based on the fact that you're saying acrylic and you don't want it to look like acrylic, is that you're probably loading too much paint on your brush. Let me show you what I would think too much would be. And let me clarify, probably too much too early in the painting. All right. You know, I'm all for breaking the rules, y'all. You know. However, again, examine your frustrations. If you're getting frustrated early in a painting, what's the frustration? It looks too heavy. Okay. What makes paint look too heavy? Not enough water in watercolor, at least, right? So that is my guess. See how heavy that looks? I'm losing the luminosity. I'm losing, like, I'm not seeing the highs and the lows or the lights and the darks. That's because I had too much paint on my brush, not enough water. That is my best guess for you, Judith. If that rings a bell in your brain and you're like, oh yeah, I probably am doing that. Yep. Yep. A little trick that you could do to kind of prevent yourself is to get a spray bottle like this, a continuous spray bottle, hold it up real high, like maybe 1.5 feet in the air directly above your paper before you start, and lightly mist the paper. Let it dry for about 20 seconds, then start painting. You'll get that. You'll automatically get that soft diffusion of any color you laid down. Hopefully that was helpful, friends. Keep those questions coming. If you're having a good time, let me know. The best way to let me know is to give this video a boop, friends. That's a like, that's a thumbs up. If you're watching on TV, I'm not exactly sure how you do it there, but anywhere else, it should be right underneath the video that you're watching as I speak. So I would so appreciate some love, some likes, and all the things. And let's keep those questions coming, friends. And the questions can be anything about supplies or techniques. How do you organize a palette? Can't read colors. Okay. So this particular palette, my palette, I organized in a very, very non-conventional way. I organized it in a way to encourage people to try very unconventional mixtures of paints. But typically my palettes, I'll show you, let me see here. And I hope that this was your question, but if it wasn't, we can follow up. Which one do I want to show you? So this is my Holbein. Yeah, this is a good one. Although my Holbein has been, the magnets on my Holbein has been giving me so much trouble since I redid this palette. It's driving me insane. As you can see, the magnets aren't holding. Oh yeah, these are the old junky magnets I had. Anyway, you can get a vibe here. I'm going from, this is a classic way I organize, from yellows, starting with yellows top left, going through to peaches, oranges, reds, pinks, into purples, then into blues, then I go into greens, then I go into the earthy stuff and wrap it up with grays, blacks, and whites. This is kind of a classic palette organization that I see a lot of people doing. If anybody else does something different, by all means, chime in. We want to hear from you. This goes down there. We would love to hear from you. So, but this is something that I do. But again, if your question was kind of a classic, or it was of my palette specifically, this is my blue, a purple, my fuchsia, peach. This is my olive green. This is my fluorescent yellow. And then I have the more emerald green, my brown, my red, my shell pink, pinky color, my ivory. And then this is kind of a yellowy olive color. So that is the organization of that palette specifically. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, there we go. All right. What are your thoughts on watercolor pencil? Best way to use them. Okay. The reason I'm growling, because I am, let's face it, I am growling at that question, is because recently I've been working on an experiment of sorts with watercolor pencils, and so much so that I have them right here by my side. I'll give you a little sneak peek. Here's the thing. I have wanted for a very long time to fall in love with watercolor pencils, but it's just not happening. And I've been painting for most of my life. So I did this experiment. This is a video coming up on this channel. If you're watching on replay, it may already be here. This is a piece I did on cold press with these uni pencils, or uni pencils. I think it's uni. And I just wasn't getting that flow, you know. Watercolor pencils, I'm trying to make them do something they really aren't meant to do. All right. So then I went in and I kind of used a different paper. This is New York Central paper. The texture is much less textury, so to speak. You can see that? All right. And I also spritzed the paper before I started working. And that worked. I think I did some washes, if I'm remembering correctly. All right. So that worked better, but still just so much texture. So I will say this. I think what I'm learning is that the best way to use watercolor pencils, the thing is, watercolor pencils just don't seem to let me, specifically me, push the limits quite as far. So I find that I'm most happy with my results when I do a base layer of painting, and then I go in and use the pencils to add the shadows, to add detail, right? So I'm finding that the best way. There are a couple additional like actual technique things that I love to do with watercolor pencils that make me feel happy. And that is to what I just did here, wet the paper first, right? And you can see the difference in kind of the intensity that happens when you do just that. So let me grab a brown here. And yeah, you can see instantly the intensity. The other thing that I have found with watercolor pencils, something to keep in mind, is your pressure. When you press too hard, and you can even say, I didn't even press hard there, and it is just still hanging on to the texture of that paper. So the harder you press, the more texture you're going to get. So keep an eye on the dampness of the paper, and then pressure. And I find it's best for building up detail towards the end of a painting. Yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on watercolor pencils. Now, I'm still very much like on a personal mission to get these things to kind of be more juicy, if you will. And one of the things that I've been playing with to do that is, number one, of course, to wet the area, to get it very wet, to almost have a little bit of a puddle on the page, and then wet the pencil, like literally dip it in my water, and then with a very light touch, go over top, very light touch, and you can see those effects are still giving me texture, but then I'm able to go in and blendy blend and get some more bleeding, but still the texture, right? No matter what I do. Now that, ooh, that went nice. See, that went nice. A little more water is what we needed there. So I'm still very much experimenting. I'm still very much trying to fall in love with these stupid things. Yeah, you heard me. I said it. I said it. They're not my favorite, but they have their place. And I'm trying to keep my bottom of my waterfall billowy here. And I, yeah. So hopefully, was that helpful? Let me know, friends. Keep those questions coming. I'm going to pop these back in. All right. Friends, if you're new here, we'd love to hear from you. If you're new, if this is your first live, head into comments, let us know. Kelly, keep an eye out for anybody that's new here. We want to say hello and give you some love. Okay, so a rigger. I'm assuming you mean a liner. Just want to make sure. So I hold it a lot of different ways. If I want more control and precision, I will hold it down towards the ferrule more than up here. The other big thing that I do, and you'll see me do in a lot of my videos, is when I am using the liner, and I will often hold it perpendicular, almost exactly perpendicular to the page. I'm going to get this book out of here because it is casting a shadow that I am not happy about. So we're going to move that. All right. So I often hold it perpendicular. Notice I've got my thumb here. Just a classic hold, right? But perpendicular, I find that gives me a ton of control. But I always say, you ultimately need to find your hold. Just because it's comfortable for me doesn't necessarily mean it is going to be comfortable for you. However, start there. Start with how I hold it and see how it feels, right? But the number one thing in terms of a hold on a liner brush is just to know that the brush in general, you're going to feel a lot less in control with a liner brush than any other brush you probably have, except for maybe like a long sword brush. But seriously, this brush is about surrendering control. You've got to loosen up your arm. But holding it far down towards the ferrule allows you to kind of get back some of that control. So hopefully that was helpful. All right. Are there any accessories that you would recommend beyond the basics? Paint, paper, brushes. Ooh. Okay. So one of the things that I love, and this is under my Amazon favorites in, Kelly can pop that link up there in my Amazon little store, is this tiered, I have to hold it this way so you can see it. This is it's mine, but I didn't design it. I wish I had. This tiered palette, and it has a little lid, which is so cute. And you can mix, I was dyeing ribbon in this one and it dried in there. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. That was from a past live actually. So you can see I very well loved and used. Some of these are gouache. Some of these are gesso. I'll have to soak them out, clean them up, but they clean up beautifully. This is one of my favorite accessories. And I also love the fact that it stacks up so it has a small footprint, especially if you've got a painting table that isn't very large. So that is something I adore for sure. I love these, and I hope this is kind of the what you were after in terms of accessories. I love these Staedtler, these kind of extendable erasers. I used to use the classic Staedtler eraser. I'm a Staedtler girl. I love their erasers. But they came out with this plastic sheath, if you will, and it's just fantastic. Also in my Amazon shop, love, love, love those. Another thing that you're always going to see on my painting table is some type of embroidery scissor. I love the smallness. I have smaller hands, so they fit well. They're also hella sharp. And I love that. Sometimes I use it to score. I'm always doing mixed media and chopping up paper, and it gives me a lot of precision. So definitely love embroidery scissors. Woo, okay, I'm thinking off the top of my head, other things that I love. I do have a lot of little vintage plates like this that I use for mixing. I forget what I was doing here, but I grabbed it and I needed a bigger space. So I love to have little vintage plates around. Oh, here's a good one. I enjoy these pigment salts. This one in particular, so this is a little more specific to actual painting. This is from Ruby Mountain Paint Co. You can find them on Instagram. And these are pigment salts. So let me show you what they do. If you're newer to watercolor, they can be a really fun, like, next step, something to treat yourself. You can grab them with a brush, but I also like to grab them with like a little spoon, or I'm doing the tip of my scissors here and just drop them onto an area and look at what they're doing. They kind of like watercolor fireworks, right? And then you can spray them again, and just they're like joy makers, because you don't really know what you're dealing with. You have to like surrender a lot of control. Gosh, that actually kind of works with the waterfall. Anyway, so I love to I have them right here off the side of my painting table. I just love to have them around. And the other thing that this is a new one for me, is this acrylic gouache. I actually had it right here. I was using it. This is another video that's coming up on the channel. And keep your questions coming, friends, because I'm wrapping this one up. But I love to have some type of gouache. This acrylic gouache is so fun, and I love the Holbein formulation. So velvety. It's fantastic. And I love, because if I'm just really feeling super punchy and I want to add something unexpected, I love to have like a fluorescent, something that has great coverage around. So super fun question. Thank you so much for asking. Let's get on to the next one. What is the difference between watercolor pencils and colored pencils? Watercolor pencils, very simply, they're like a pigment that is bound with something that allows it to be re-wet. And then there's additional fillers because, of course, it's in a more solid pencil form. Colored pencils are, I'm not a colored pencil expert. Sarah Renee Clark is going to be teaching me colored pencils on this channel coming up in the next few months. So I'm excited about that. However, colored pencils are like a waxy base. They are not going to reconstitute with water whatsoever. So those are the big differences. Now there are certain like emulsifiers. I don't know if that's the word, but there's certain like mediums that you can use with colored pencils that will kind of liquefy or loosen the pigment particles and allow you to move it around the page. But again, no expert, but that is the basic difference. Can you explain? Oh, here we go. If you could only have 8 colors, what would they be using Winsor & Newton Pro? Okay. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Opera Rose for sure. One of my favorite colors from Winsor & Newton. I can actually pull out my Winsor & Newton. They're Naples yellow, 100%. I love their cobalt turquoise. Either one, but light cobalt turquoise light from Winsor & Newton is so delicious. And let me see here. So sorry. I'm trying to find my Winsor & Newton. No, that's Daniel Smith. Winsor & Newton's Potter's Pink is pretty fantastic. How many is that? That's one of the ones that I love. And then, oh my gosh, this is hard. I think they have one of the better cobalts, if that's helpful. So those would be just off the top of my head. Yeah. Okay. I had to take a drink. Holy moly. Can you talk about your approach to using opaque versus transparent watercolors? Yes, I can. That's a delicious, lovely question. Ooh, hi, making a mess here. Okay. I love that question because traditionally watercolors are seen as a sheer media. And of course that is, the watercolor's magic is the sheerness. But naturally occurring, you know, pigments that are used that are non-synthetic. And my point in bringing this up is that some pigments are naturally more opaque, give you more coverage easily than others. And so, like, for example, when I was making my palette, building my palette, it was very important for me to show off the different opacities, the different personalities of watercolor. So one of the ways that you can play with that is by, and this is a great exercise, nothing fancy here, but so the red is a more sheer color on my palette, but I have my brush here. I'm using my number 6 Joy Chaser round travel brush. This one is available right now. We launched it about a week and a half ago, or 2 weeks. I don't know. Anywho, I loaded this up. My brush was just barely damp, right? Loaded it up with a ton of color. My little pan here was like syrupy. It was nice and constituted and syrupy. You can lay that color down and just look at how intense. This is what I would call mass tone, right? And then what I love to do is pick, so this is a more sheer color on my palette. And I'm going to show you just how sheer it is. It's a little more staining, but also very sheer, right? See how it shears down? So then go on to my palette. Now, obviously, use whatever palette you have, and you have to kind of think back to using it. What colors felt like they were almost creamy? And that's going to be this next color that you go to. Find a creamy color on your palette. Load it up the same way. Just damp brush and a lot of paint, right? Go right next door to your first one that you did that with and do the same kind of like serpentine stroke. And I want you to just pay attention. It looks muddy and weird and gross, but just pay attention to what's happening here, right? There's some interesting things happening here. And then go right next door to that with another more sheer color. My blue is one of the more sheer colors in the palette. And same thing. See how it mixy mixes and blendy blends. And if you're seeing things you like, then go ahead and do 2 little puddles right next to each other of those colors, right? And then mix them and see what happens. Don't fully mix them, but see what happens in the in-between. Look at that. Isn't that so interesting? And then you've got 3 colors now. Take a clean brush and wash it down, because the thing that I love is the play between opaque and sheer. I love to experiment with the in-between, right? I love to experiment with also the contrast between opaque and sheer. So pay attention to the in-between, right? The in-between. And pay attention to, is it creamy? That's probably more opaque paint. And start introducing that into your paintings and see what happens. Or if you're a little nervous about that, just do this exercise. This exercise is so incredibly fun. So let's do another one. This is like my emeraldy-ish green from my set. And it shears out beautifully. It's definitely a more sheer formulation. And then we're going to rock and roll it with some of the shell pink, which is made with PW6. It's made with a classic, you know, white mixture. And look at what some of the fun stuff, again, muddy and weird, although this color is actually lovely. I don't mind it whatsoever. And this is a mix that I use a lot in my paintings. But look at how, look at how that shell pink with the PW6 in it, the pigment white 6, kind of blended with that green that is more sheer. And then flood or charge, traditionally known as charging, but I like to rename things, as you know, for no good reason, except that it just works better in my brain. Flood, so that now you're pushing more of that paint and that water down into one area. It's going to get more opaque, right? And then where you started the flood is going to get more sheer. And just look, just pay attention then. Go and make notes. Be like, oh, look at like this area where the pink and the green is starting to flood into the pink. And, you know, this area where it's really just getting hit with the pink, but still has all the sheerness of the green. And just marvel at what can happen where opaque meets transparent. And hopefully that helps, friends. Send me some more questions, friends. I can't wait to hear more of your questions. All right, what does the permanent versus other? I have koi paints, new to painting, and some say permanent and some don't. Let me pull out my koi palette. Oh gosh, this thing is old. And see what they're doing with the way they're labeling things. Although I don't have the box, so oh yeah, this isn't going to help. So my guess is that you're talking about a permanency rating, and that is light fastness. And light fastness is a measure of how stable a color is with prolonged UV exposure. And so that is what we're talking about here. So light fastness in terms of watercolor and in painting in general is a huge conversation, and there is a mild level of controversy, especially on my channel, because I do paint with a lot of colors that are more impermanent or fugitive, if you will. But I do protect my paintings by keeping them out of full light exposure. And I also do spray them with a UV finish when they're complete. And then I also recommend that any buyers frame them under a UV protecting glass. So there's a lot of steps you can take to protect your paintings. The fugitive nature or the fading ability of a paint is going to be more rapid and more obvious in areas that are closer to the equator. So where you live and where you show your paintings can make a difference in that. So I believe that is kind of where you were going with that question. If not, please let me know. Watercolor paper, says Mary Ann. What kinds do you use? And do you use a practice paper when you're painting new things or techniques? Okay. I literally have so much watercolor paper, I don't even know what to do with myself, because I test them out. Most often, I am found using this paper. I will be honest, you know, this is my career. I spend a lot on paper, and I practice on good paper, okay? I realize that that is not something that everyone can do. So I'm guessing maybe you want a recommendation for a good practice paper. That really depends on budget. You know, if your budget is extremely limited, they have a really nice paper at Five Below that's like $3.50 for a pad of like a 9x6 pad. Now, if you have more resources, Academy is phenomenal, and I wish everyone could do their practice paintings on Academy, because Academy I find to be almost as good as Arches for a fraction of the cost. But Academy is what I'm using most often. But honestly, I'll paint on anything except for Strathmore. So I can make pretty much anything work. There's a lot. I've got a really nice review coming up. It's a big video. It's taking me forever. I review 100% cotton watercolor brands. And I will tell you this right off the bat. Arteza Expert, really nice. Another one that I thought was nice, I'm trying to remember, was it actually, I should look at my notes, but I don't know where they are. But Arteza Expert was really nice. Jen Crafts 100% cotton was surprisingly nice. And then off the top of my head, and these would be great for practice because of the affordability factor, but the fact that they are also 100% cotton, although not all 100% cotton is made equal. And Paul Rubens 100% cotton watercolor paper, fantastic. Awesome question. Keep them coming. UV finish. So there are sprays. All right, I'm going to get up out of my chair and I'm going to grab this. So you're going to hear, I'm going to sound distant for a moment. You're going to hear my chair creaking, but it's for good cause. All right, so here it is. And things are going to fall out of this cabinet. I just know they are. Yes, so something like this is fantastic to spray your paintings once they're done. It contains UV light absorbers and stabilizers. It doesn't say that it's good for watercolor, but it is. It's used by many artists out there. It's fantastic. And it also is workable. So you can spray it, let it dry according to directions, and then work back into it. I haven't actually done that, but that's what they claim. So this is that UV finish that I'm talking about. And there are others. There's a lot of options. Double load. Yes. Double loading your brush. All right. Oop. I'm done with that paper. And this paper is definitely one-sided. It is so one-sided. Okay. I need to find another piece of paper. No, that's, here we go. I'm just going to have to remove this painting. And so double loading your brush is when you load up with more than one color at a time. And it's fan flipping-tastic. It creates a real energy in your paintings quickly. All right, so I'm going to grab my 1/2-inch dagger, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dip into this green here with the front end of my brush, and then I'm going to dip into this blue with the back end. And I'm going to spritz a little. All right. And let's do a leaf. That is double loading. That's the magic of double loading. So I'm going to repeat that. I'm not re-wetting my brush, so it's going to be slightly stronger. And that's double loading. There's so many ways you can use double loading. Leaves, obviously. Flowers. And you're like, well, doesn't that mess up your palette? It dirties up your palette, but it's not the end of the world. Where do I want to put this? Let's just do like a bud. Oh, I had a little bit of something else on there. I just added a little bit of purple, but it creates dimension so quickly. So quickly. It's just lovely. So a little bit of red again, and then a little bit of purple. And then I'm going to rinse this time and go next to it just with some water. And there's some residual purple on my brush there. But that's it. That's double loading. A great experiment is just to fill a page with leaves that you make from double loading your brush. I would highly recommend doing that as an exercise. It's fantastic. And you will learn so much. Keep those questions coming, friends. Head into comments. What has been your favorite question answered so far? Let me know. Do you ever cut your paper for cards, and what cutter does the job? Yes. Now, friends, full disclosure, some of you may know I have another business. It's called Momental Designs. We create custom event stationery. So I have access to really nice cutters. But honestly, here in my home studio where I work, I use a little, oh, let me just find it. You're going to hear me get distant again. Okay. It is Fiskars. This is, oh, hi, cabinet door banging. This is what I use. And this is an older one, so I'm sure the newest iteration of it looks different. But it's just a little Fiskars and this little like blade. And this is what I use in the studio just to cut things up as needed. It suits. I'm not a big fan of guillotine cutters. Those are the ones with the big arm that chop down. They're very inaccurate. They shift the paper when it hit, you know, when that arm, that guillotine arm hits the paper, it shifts and skews your paper. So I love more like a rotary trimmer or one of those trimmers that just drags down along the surface. All right, more questions. Keep them coming, friends. Should one draw before painting? I just go for it. That is a simple answer to this question. If you are feeling joy from just going for it, then by all means, keep doing that. If you're curious about drawing first, then try it. But if it's starting to cause you, if you try it and it feels frustrating, stop. That is I know that seems so simple, but you know, my presumption here is that most of us are here for joy and that we're not looking to necessarily start or build a career out of things. Now, obviously, if you were, there is a beautiful time and place in that journey to start challenging yourself, to take classes, to improve your sketching skills, for example. But if you're just here for the joy, and this is a meditative practice, or this is a practice that you just is your hobby, right? Then do it the way that feels the most relaxing. That's what I say. All right. I'm just doing some more here because I'm actually really liking the vibe of this. Layer without overworking the paper. Oh my Lord. Yes. Yes. Okay. So I'm trying to see if I have anything that I can work on. Let me actually just go and work on this thing. So 3 big things in terms of layering without overworking. Just off the top of my head. Number 1 would be to layer gradually. So make it gradual. All right. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be more realistic. But if you go into a layer, so I've got this nice soft pink here, right? If I go into that and I just want to intensify, say like the shadow here, maybe I want to make it look shadowy there. If I go into it and I'm just like red, you know what I mean? Like I really pile on the red, like there's not much to go from there, right? I didn't go gradual, right? So instead, the next layer, let it just be, you know, I don't know, 20% more intense than your last layer. Don't go crazy. Don't go too heavy too quickly. So that would be my first recommendation. My next recommendation is exactly what I'm just doing now. Watch your paper towel blotting. So I'm just going to put watch blotting. And here's why. Blotting tends to lead, especially when you're frustrated, tends to lead to friction and often too much friction. Blotting also easily tends to lead to scraping. And that really starts to disrupt the texture of the paint on the paper and even the texture of the paper. And that's when things start to look fatigued and you even could get some pilling at that point. So layer your intensity gradually and watch with blotting. And then also watch with lifting. Because as you're layering, and then if you're making corrections and lifting and blotting and lifting and blotting and scrubbing, again, we're back to the same problem. It's going to start to feel fatigued. And then the third piece of advice on layering without it looking overworked is really give those layers time to dry. All right? Because when you lay down, now there are workarounds. I layer a lot and sometimes I don't let things fully dry in between. But I know how to like adjust my pressure and things like that. And that is a more advanced conversation. But if you let your layers dry, use a heat gun, use a hair dryer, speed up that drying process, really make sure that when you press your hand down, it feels fully dry in between each layer. You're going to get more sharpness, more contrast, more crispness. Otherwise, essentially what you're doing is wet on damp, wet on damp, wet on damp over and over again. And it's just going to look like a smudgy mess. So hopefully that was helpful. Fantastic question. Love that so much. Oh my gosh. Do I like granulating paints? Do I like sunshine? Yeah. Okay, I'm a big fan of granulating paints. Let me see if I have some just sitting around here that I can show you for those who maybe are like, what the heck is a granulating paint? Actually, I do. I have some of these Van Goghs that I picked up on a recent painting situation. I'm trying to think, was this one? No, I think this green is granulating. Let's see. So granulating pigment, there's a lot of, science to it. And I'm probably going to explain it imperfectly, and that's okay. I'm just going to get some right on the paper. The pigment particles are bigger and they're not broken down as much. And you're seeing some of that as you move the pigment around, the paint around on the paper with water. And I'm sure there are going to be others in the comments who are going to be able to explain this better than I. So please, please do. Yes, this is granulating. So granulating paints need to be pushed around with water to show off what they do. So that's why I'm doing this. And then I also could pull out my Schminke. So let me find my Schminke palette. So this is Van Gogh. But you can see, you can even start to see it already. Now this is so much paint. This is more paint than you would ever need. And this is why I tell people, please do not use paint straight out of the tubes as a beginner, because you're going to do things like this and wonder why things don't feel right. All right. But I wanted to really show you what granulating does. All right. You can start to see it here. And also with granulating pigments, they're typically not a single pigment formulation. A lot of the ones you're seeing on the market now, there are multiple pigments going into one formulation. So you'll start to see color separation. You're already starting to see it here. Multiple greens going on. There's a little bit of like a gray going on. And the granulation will appear and become more obvious as the painting dries. So with granulation, I know that wasn't your question exactly, but with granulation, water is key. Kind of bullying the pigment around on the page is key. And then also just letting it do its thing. I mean, you can literally see it is changing before your eyes. Wow. That is incredible. This is a new paint to me. So this brand, not this brand, but this particular color, this is called, from Van Gogh, this is called Dusk Green. I think there's a whole dusk collection, and that's their granulating collection. But I mean, look at, there's even like is that blue? I don't know. There is so much happening here. Anyway, but you can play. You can play with granulating pigments and just do little things like this where I'm kind of pushing and then blotting and seeing what happens. Great question. Can you paint watercolors on metal? If so, how do you do it? Thank you. Okay. So I've never, wait, I'm trying to think. Have I actually done watercolor? No. But if you were going to attempt it, my first thing would be to, number one, scuff up the metal however best you could, really thoroughly. So, get the shine off the surface. And then use a watercolor ground. My favorite is Golden, or Daniel Smith has a watercolor ground. They're both fantastic. And you paint that watercolor ground on heavily, like really lay it on, let it fully dry, and then you'd be able to paint. In theory, you'd be able to paint on the metal. Now, would you see the metal through? No, because you got to paint the watercolor ground so heavily. So, but there's some interesting opportunity for experimentation there. I'd be curious. And now you've got me curious and I want to try it out. But I would definitely look at what's happening just from blotting. I would definitely try watercolor ground. Yep. Can you show us specific brush strokes, or do you have other tutorial videos on them? Oh my gosh, I can show you brush strokes. Absolutely. But I do have a whole playlist here about brush drills for sure. But I've got the number 6 round in my hand. So let's just play around with that. I do a lot of florals. I do a lot of landscapes, but I do a lot of leaves. So that's naturally where I gravitate. But I do a press, drag, and lift most often. That is kind of the core of my approach to loose watercolors. So you press down, point first. I'm going to try to hold my brush differently than I normally would. And then you press, drag, slow drag, and then a slow lift will bring you right to a point. And then, of course, you can go in with another one, edit, make it a little wider. And then upstroke. Press, drag, and lift. Didn't have enough water on my brush there. upstroke, press, drag, and lift. That is the basic stroke. Let me show you that again. Different color. Holding my brush so you can actually see what I'm doing. Press, drag, and lift. And you can wiggle and lift, and you can press and wiggle. And so I would get down that press, drag, and lift, and then start to edit it. So this is a press, drag, and I'm wiggling while I drag to get a softer edge. Repeat it. And that's going to give you a leaf. The press, drag, and lift can also be applied to kind of a classic rose or a classic modern watercolor rose. Press, drag, and lift, these kind of concentric C's, backward C's, curving around each other. I'm kind of holding the brush at about a 30-degree angle and going around and round. But certain areas I'm pressing more, and certain areas I'm lifting more. And that is going to give you kind of that rosy quality. But press, drag, and lift for sure. And then the other thing you can do, and you can check out the playlist with the brush drills, is just, I think one of the things that we need to build as beginners that's so important is really paying attention to the pressure on our brush and really changing it up. So one of the drills I love is just to press and lift. Don't leave the paper. Press and lift. I'm running out of paint. It's okay. Press and lift. Load up with water again. Press. Don't leave the paper. Lift. Press. Lift. Press. Lift. Press. Lift. Just doing that over and over and over again is going to create some incredible muscle memory for you. Muscle memory is basically the way that it's eye-hand coordination for painters, right? And for a lot of fields. So this is a great little exercise to really build that muscle memory. And it's also a great exercise because you're going to learn about wet on dry, wet on damp, and water control, because you're going to learn how much, like if you want to get a smooth finish on that full brush stroke without having to reload, you're going to figure out real fast how much pressure, how much paint, and how much water to have on your brush. Lift, lift, and it can be done. Now it's getting lighter, but it's a whole lot smoother. So this is great for brush control, and this is great for water control. So try this exercise. Fantastic. Next question. Can you please explain the PR codes? Oh, the pigment codes. Yeah. So on tubes of paint, you're going to see PR, you're going to see PW, you're going to see a lot of different P's. So P stands for pigment, and then the next letter is the color. So PW is pigment white, PR is pigment red, and there's so many different combinations. Friends, what is the name of that website that's all about the pigments? There's a couple of them, but there's one that is specifically really, really well known. I can't remember the name of it right now. I am not what I would lovingly call a pigment nerd. I know what I need to know, and I know the basics, but I don't memorize pigment codes for the paints that I'm using. If I need them, I look them up. And that's kind of the thing that I do. And I say nerd in the most loving way possible. Somebody called me out the other day because I used the word nerd. And I was like, oh, you don't understand. I married a nerd. He's awesome. We think nerds are cool now. It's not like it was like in the 70s or before, or even the 80s and 90s. When you were a nerd, you were not cool. Nerds are cool now. Just want to get that out there. Yes. Crick, yes. Kim Crick has an amazing website all about pigments and handprint. Thank you, Mary. So Kim Crick's website and handprint.com, I think it's .com. Fantastic. You want to learn more about what the P and the W and the P and the R's and all the things, the PYs, so pigment yellow. If you want to really dig in, go to those websites. Where can we purchase individual half pans of the palette? I go through some of the colors fast. Just reach out, hello@Kristy Rice, attention Kristen, and let her know that you're interested in getting some of those refills, and she'll take care of you. Pantone, stupid autocorrect. How do you paint shadows in watercolor without making them too dark or creating hard edges transitioning into the shadows? Great question. So if you want a smooth shadow, that is kind of like going back to, let me grab this sheet, thinking about how we swatch colors, right? You want to go from a darker area to a lighter area. So it's about water control again. That's why that's why water control is so important. All right, so let's just call this a bud of some kind. I'm going to go and add a stroke here to said bud. Really strong color, right? I'm going to add that. Use that press, drag, and lift again. I'm going to rinse. And this is basically what I call the ombre technique, or, oh my gosh, pulling. That's the classic name. You're going to go right next door with clean water and start to pull that color away. And you're going to do that again. And if you're not getting as much of that ombre effect, you just want to get more water on your brush. But you can see that shadow starting to appear right next door. Right next door. Keep going. Keep going. And there you have your gradual transition from dark shadow back to light. And then if you want to, you know, I feel like I would want to brighten this area up over here a little bit on the edge. So I would pop some more of the red in there while it's damp. But that is a very fast and loose approach to a smooth transition shadow. Yeah. It's basically the ombre or the pulling technique. Do you or anyone have a heat tool that you recommend? I have a heat tool, but I have no idea what brand it is. And I'm not the biggest fan, so I'm not going to recommend mine. Just doesn't have enough power. So I'll go ahead and let anyone else answer that. Kristy's neon for shadows. Yes. How do I stop being so nervous when I begin my painting practice? Is this normal? It's 100% normal. It's 100% normal. But it's also 100% a lot of what gets in our way of fully enjoying our experience. I would ask yourself a few questions. Are you worried about waste? If you're worried about waste for financial reasons, that's a valid concern. Just remember that your paper has two sides, okay? And to use them, right? If you're worried about messing up, let's just talk about that now. You are going to mess up. Like, let's reset our expectations. Let's just sit down to paint assuming we're going to mess up. Seriously. I know you're probably like, is she insane? A little bit, but let's just get that off the table, right? Use both sides of your paper and know that you're going to mess up. It's, you know, I run two businesses, and there's something called the cost of doing business. It's the general cost of just running a business. It is what it is. It's a fact of running a business. Well, the fact of being on a painting journey, a creative journey, is that you're going to, quote unquote, in theory, waste some supplies. Although I truly believe there's no wasting of supplies, because you're advancing every time you put brush to paper, right? And you are 100% going to mess up, and you're going to mess up more than you're not. So let's just stop being nervous about it, because it's going to happen. So it really is a mindset thing. And I'm sorry, my hands are just doing all the talking. So, one of the things that you can do more practical is set a timer, and set a timer for 2 minutes at first, and just paint on that one piece of paper for 2 minutes, and make it smaller. Like, cut up your larger sheets. Like this sheet, like cut it up into 6 pieces, right? Just to give you reference, this is like a 10 by 13. Cut this up into 6 pieces and do a 2-minute painting and put it to the side. Then do a 5-minute painting. Put it to the side, all in one session. Go back, do another 2-minute painting, put it to the side. Because also what we do is we hyper focus, and that can create a lot of stress and nervousness, even in the early stages of a painting. But if you time yourself and you don't give yourself a ton of time to get into that hyper focused nervous stage, you're all the better for it. All right. Love it. Love it. Do you ever do a meet and greet? I've been asked this question a lot recently. Friends, go into comments and let me know if what are some I'm thinking, when I think about general areas like, you know, Northern California, Eastern, like New York City, Texas, like what are some areas that you think would be great if I were to do a meet and greet sometime in 2023, if I were to do an in-person workshop or a series of workshops in 2023, what would be a good location? Let me know in comments. I have not done them, and maybe it's time. Maybe I should. Love that question. Keep them coming, friends. If you're having a good time, head into comments. Let us know. Let's give Kelly some love because she's fantastic. She is multitasking. Kelly works in my other business, Momental Designs. So she is just, she's just kind of doing all the things all the time, and she's so good at it. So good at it. How do I compose my floral pieces? Oof, that's a big question. Let's get a new paper. So we're talking about composition here, friends, and composition is a big subject. So it's not something I'm going to be able to address. Can before I exit this paper, for the love, Van Gogh, you are killing it in the granulating game. What's the name of this color again? These are called shades or something? Dusk. OMG. I mean, oh my gosh. Okay, enough of that. Composition. Big question. I have a video on composition. I will try to remember to link that below, where we got into it pretty deep. And there are many ways to attack composition. But some of my tips and tricks revolve around some basic approaches. And that's going to be number 1, asymmetry. Did I spell that right? I don't know. Number 2, and these are kind of connected, odd numbers of things. And then shockingly, the opposite of asymmetry, which is balance. And you're like, but Kristy, you're like contradicting yourself. I am, but I'm not. Okay. So when I'm composing a composition, let me just square off some of this so we're not trying to fill up this whole page, right? All right. I'm just going to kind of work in this space. I'm often thinking about odd numbers of floral elements, and often in the kind of a triangle formation, right? In terms of balance, I'm thinking of things like I want to put some leafy moments in here, but I don't want to have heavy, big leafy moments at the top, right? Because if I did that, watch what's going to happen. If I put like really big leaves, and this also has to do with scale, right? Put really big leaves up here, and then I do wispy moments down here, I'm throwing everything off balance, right? So think about things like that, right? Now, does that mean I can only have 3 flowers in my composition? Absolutely not. We know that's not true, right? But this is just a general way to think about things as you begin. So putting in some of these more wispy stems for some balance, right? And asymmetry. You're like, you want balance, but you want asymmetry. Well, and now certainly there are paintings that exist in this world that break every single rule of composition and work, but it's usually because of balance, right? So, for example, if you have a very symmetrical painting, like if I did another one of these over here, right? And I did another one of these over here, right? Things are starting to get really symmetrical. And I did another one of these over here, right? And then maybe this is I like this. This is a good example. You're going to see where I'm taking this. and do something here. I'm going to do the same something here, right? And here and here. And let's maybe add some more pink here and here. And you're like, well, this is symmetrical, and it's not perfectly symmetrical, obviously. But how do I make something like this work more? Well, I might go in and add a little surprise flower here, and then a tinier version of it here. And that throws all the symmetry off. I've broken some of the composition rules, but then I balance the breaking of the rule by breaking another rule, right? So asymmetry, odd numbers, balance. Always just thinking about those three factors is super helpful for me. Another thing with composition in the beginning is set a timer and do a 1-minute sketch of what you think might look good. Do it small, even smaller than this one, like a 1-minute sketch with your brush, I mean, and that can be really fun, but time yourself. Literally set a timer, or else you're going to go down a rabbit hole of sketching too much and not getting to the quote real painting, and limit yourself to one sketch and then get onto it. So that is my extremely fast and loose recommendation in terms of composition. Okay. Beginning painter, how do you properly prep your paint? Big question. Basically, if you are working from tubes, I highly recommend you get them into these little half pans. My Amazon store has all of this for palette making. You can head there and check that out. So if you have tubes, squeeze them into half pans, put a little magnet inside the half pan. I have videos about this. You can watch it on the channel. And let that paint cure up, meaning let it dry. At least let it build a little bit of a film over top. Different brands will take different amounts of time to cure. And then, I mean, that's really it for prepping. Other than once they're cured, you need to spray them down with a spray bottle. I love this continuous spray bottle. It's newer for me, but I don't know what I ever did without it, but any spray bottle will do. You can even take a brush and just drop little drops of water into each pan. And that's it. Let that water soak in for a good 20 seconds and you're ready to rumble. That's about it. Let me know if that was helpful, friends. Girl, what do you do with all the paintings? Oh my gosh, I've got them up at my Momental studio in file folders. I've got a cabinet full of them here. A lot of my work is eventually sent up to the studio and scanned and stored there. But yeah, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. What do you do when you have depression or art block? The first thing that I do is, and I've been there, there was a time where I didn't paint for 4 months. Which for me as a professional just felt really, really, really intense and sad, right? The first thing you do is kind of let yourself be there for a time, meaning don't beat yourself up about the fact that you're not painting. All right. Because you're not gonna do yourself any favors if you're sitting there and just being like, I can't believe I can't quote snap out of this. I should just paint. No. Sometimes you need to do something else creative. And that could be cooking yourself a simple meal. That could be listening to some music. Just do something else with your hands. I know it's cliche, but go out, get a little bit of fresh air every day. It will come back. It will come back. Now, in terms of depression, I am not a doctor of any kind, but I have experienced tremendous anxiety, and that has absolutely derailed my art journey at times. And what I have found for me, and this is very much a personal statement, it's not necessarily what I recommend for you, but what has worked for me, once I've given myself some time to kind of like just decompress from the art block, is to create very simply, to clean my desk, remove additional distractions from my painting area, limit my supplies, and do very small, quick paintings. And I have found that to be a really great way to get myself kind of back into the swing of things, so to speak. Yeah. So, those are simple recommendations that I have for you in terms of creative block and things that I've literally done myself. Why, when I keep painting the same picture, the results are worse? My paintings from 3 years ago are better than now. Okay, I love this question. I've been there. There was a time, I was in my early 30s, and I had, for whatever reason, I had pulled out paintings from when I was in college of roses that I had done. And I was, doing the blasted comparison thing. And I was comparing them to roses I had recently done. And my college roses were better. And the biggest thing I can say as to the why would be this. As we continue in our painting journey, we tend to get harder on ourselves. We tend to expect more of ourselves. And that kind of pressure can impact your work negatively. Now, I don't know you, I don't know your specific situation, but that could be something certainly to consider. Your stress, your anxiety, your elevated expectations of your work could be actually causing you, could be showing up in your work in a negative way. So that being said, love this effect I'm getting here. I'm adding just some kind of a high flow acrylic into the wet paint. So pretty. That then would lead me to say, okay, you might want to do something in terms of kind of some self-care creative habits. Maybe stop painting the same thing. Maybe try something different for a few weeks. Try a different medium for a while. Things like that to kind of shake yourself up, shake yourself out of a potential stressful kind of mental loop. That would be my recommendation. Been in the blueberry phase lately. I'm not sure why. Next question. I feel like I'm good at following tutorials and copying others' work as practice. But when I try to start my own original piece, it becomes an overworked mess, even with an inspiration photo. Any tips? Yes. Do half of a tutorial. Start there. If you're trying to jump from fully going from a full-blown tutorial to doing your own thing, that's a big jump mentally and physically, right? With your hands, your coordination, all the things. So do half of the tutorial. Do part of the composition, and then turn the tutorial off and go ahead and try to evolve the composition from the point where you stop the tutorial. That can be a great, great transition to fully developing your own compositions. That would be my number one, do it right away recommendation. Try that and see how you feel. I have learned that if I walk away, let it dry, and add pen, I like them better. Absolutely. This was something my art teacher, when I was a young girl, taught me very early on. She was a traditional watercolorist, but she called it saving a painting. And she was like, and I turned it into a love for mixed media, to be quite honest. And she would do that after it dried. You weren't loving something. Yeah, add some pen outline to it and everything feels better. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that could be another thing. Go back to some of those paintings that you think you don't like and rework them with some mixed media, really push them, really go all in. I mean, what have you got to lose if you already don't like the painting? And see what happens. All right. Do have a tutorial. How are we doing on time, friends? What the heck time is it? I have no idea. But friends, keep those questions coming. Let's see. How do I add shadows to realistic-ish florals without losing overall vibrancy of the painting? I don't use black. Usually a paint's gray, but everything usually ends up grayed out. Okay. Use color. Use color. Notice even here with my blueberries, I'm building shadow, but oh, hi, I'm gonna have to put another blueberry there. I just smudged it. I used fuchsia as my shadow instead of adding something dark like a brown or a Payne's gray to the blue that was already there. Use fuchsia. That is my number one recommendation. Stop using something that you think is going to make color darker and think about adding color to your color to make it more intense. And also just intense, take the same color and apply it a little bit more heavily and see how that feels. See how that feels. Love it. Love it. Will acrylic ruin your watercolor brushes? No. I would not recommend using acrylic with like a true fully natural bristle brush because they are more delicate and you would wear them out quicker. Would they ruin? No, but you'd wear them out quicker, in my opinion. But synthetic brush or a synthetic hybrid brush will be fine. You just want to make sure you really need to clean those brushes after you're done, fully done painting for the day. Give them more than just a rinse in your watercolor, in your water bin. Actually go and wash them. And you don't even necessarily need soap, but really rinse them with clean water from the tap when you're done. And you'll be golden. You'll be fine. Next question. Plein air supplies. Okay. I am quite simple when it comes to plein air. I do not use an easel. I have them. I just I don't like standing when I paint. I work literally in my lap, or if I'll find a picnic table somewhere. But I tend to work small-ish. The largest I'll go plein air is 9x12. And I will usually just take one of my brush sets with me. And as of the last year, I've been developing my collapsible painter's pot. Faber-Castell makes a collapsible water cup, which I highly recommend for space. Everything that I paint with plein air fits in a small backpack. I don't like to be weighed down. I take this palette or something very comparable in size. I think the largest palette I've ever taken plein air is something like this size. I mean, you're just talking slightly larger. I like to keep it simple, especially if you're just starting plein air. Good heavens to Betsy, keep it simple or you are going to frustrate yourself and not want to do it anymore. So, and that's the case for goodness, anything with a beginner. Like, go slow, tread lightly. Don't frustrate yourself because the point is we want to keep you painting. And plein air painting is some of the most exciting, invigorating painting. And the last thing you want is a whole bunch of unneeded supplies weighing you down and making you feel frustrated. So that hopefully was helpful. Just keep it small, keep it simple, and leave no trace. That's all I got. Question: shadows for rocks, cliffs are hard. Tips. I have found with cliffs and rocks that the shadows very quickly get more sharp and crisp. I use a lot of cross hatching in like mountainy scenes. Like, you know, if I'm, you know, obviously I'm not a realistic painter, but I will use a lot of like linear work. Like here, I'll go in to create like a receding cliff face. I will use like linear marks. But I find that rocks, let me do something here so you can see it better. I might start a rock with, you know, kind of a nice gradual ombre, right? Like this. That might be where I start. But I will quickly get into stronger colors. Now this is still damp, and intensity quickly, and add things like that. Now, when this would dry, I might come in, I can't do it now because it's not dry, but I might come in with some cross hatching. I do a lot of cross hatching for rocks and cliff faces, stuff like this, or partial cross hatching, right? And then you also want to think about shadows. Just think about the shapes of a shadow, right? And being kind of crisp and specific about the shapes of your shadows. And I'm just kind of, I don't know, those kind of look like lips. And I also, with rocks, I kind of feel like, you know, keep it simple, sweetie, is very much in order. You can easily overwork a rock trying to make it perfect, trying to make it feel more real, right? And often rocks don't need a lot of excess to feel effective and real. Yeah. I can't seem to get my flowers to look like a real flower. Well, this is a really good question. And number one, it has a lot to do with expectation, because how real are we talking? You know what I mean? Like, how real? That is an important question. I just did a video where I talked about realism. I did a Cosmo flower. You can find it here. It's like 2 videos back as of the time of recording this. And I talked about building up detail gradually. And that is a very reliable path to realism, right? But then you can also break that rule and still have it be realistic-ish. So, but my best advice for realism is to build up gradually and kind of follow that rule of starting with light washes first, starting with big basic shapes first, and then slowly layered. Let your brush strokes get smaller and smaller and smaller, and also at the same time get more intense, more coverage of color. And that, I find, is the best path to a more realistic flower, or anything for that matter. Yeah. Next question. I am a super beginner and I find art both therapeutic and scary. Absolutely. That makes sense. Figure that one out. Yeah, I know, but it makes sense. Always, anyways, any tips or ideas for some art as therapy? Absolutely. So one of the things that I love to do, I call it color bumping. And here's the thing, anything that's good for us and that makes us feel better at times is also going to frustrate us and be scary and be something we don't necessarily want to do at times, right? I always compare it to exercise. I know it's going to make me feel better in the long run for the most part, even in the short term, once I get my blood pumping. Same thing with painting. I know if I sit down and I'm just feeling like I'm in a funk, I know if I just sit down and put brush to paper, I know I'm going to feel better. But, you know, so don't be too hard on you. My point in saying this is don't be too hard on yourself on that front, because it's life. But I love color bumping. Lay down a color, no particular shape, rinse your brush, grab another color and bump and repeat. Rinse, paint, bump. I like to use more water than not when I'm color bumping, or else you don't see a lot of like interaction. And I also love to color bump with different transparencies. Pop some white in there. I mean, hello, like, I can't, that couldn't have been more perfect. And that looks like a butterfly. But seriously, I just dribbled some white in there and then continue. Enjoy, soak it up, like watch what's happening. Introducing white, like an acrylic or a gesso, into a very, very wet puddle of watercolor is one of the most fascinating things that you can do that I don't see a lot of artists talking about. So color bumping, and yeah, you're going to get muddy, weird things happening, but who cares? Because you got stuff like that happening, right? Color bump. That's my recommendation. Oh yeah. Let's do some of this pink. Bump. And once you've got this much water on your paper, you don't have to do much to get those colors to dance with one another. You just have to touch a little bit. Do some more of that white. Hello. Hello. And then push, nudge, bully it around a little bit. Rinse. Just make sure if you're using acrylic, don't dip an acrylic brush back into your palette. It could really affect the quality of your palette moving forward. Gesso is not going to reconstitute. That's a tricky question. Gesso is not going to reconstitute once it's dry. So you don't, and acrylic, the same. Once this acrylic is dry on this page, I'm not going to be able to spritz it and have it reactivate. So you have to just be careful when using a brush, mixed media. You just got to do a lot of rinsing. And know that once you put it down and it dries, it is what it is. You're kind of stuck with it. I mean, look at this cool stuff happening when I hit the white. Look at that. Color bumping for the win. 100% color bumping. All right, friends. A couple more questions. Do I use sparkly paint? Friends, I am a long time anti-shimmer. However, I got sent this palette from Artistic Isle. Go check her out on Instagram. It's Artistic Isle, like I-S-L-E, like island, but Isle. And these are handmade watercolors. And for some reason, this peachy shimmery color she sent me in this palette made me kind of get back a little bit of love for the shimmers. So I don't use them often. The main reason is because as someone who licenses my artwork, I find that shimmers, when they scan, are a little tricky. And so I shied away from them because of that, because of what I'm doing with my artwork after it's done. I'm scanning and I'm manipulating in Photoshop and different things. So my recent Cosmo painting, where I was talking about the realism with a question, 2 questions back, I used a lot of shimmers in that painting. Very interesting results. You should go check it out. I'll try to make sure I get that linked up after the live is done. Friends, are we having a good time? Was this a good session? Would you like me to do this again? I know myself when it comes to YouTube, I love replays of lives, especially longer ones. some of my favorite artists, like, and also some educational stuff that I do here on YouTube. I love to pop on like an hour and a half long live and just listen to it on my headphones while I'm working. Let me know if you're like me. I'm going to read these comments later. Let me know if you like a longer live that you can just listen to and come back to again and again. Question: how to add details to the first layer of a floral composition to bring everything together? Oh, I love that question, because this is one of the things that I do best. It's kind of one of the hallmarks of my style, because my style that I do most often, I am not doing a ton of layers, right? I can do it on this piece too. So something that I love to do is I get a painting to this stage, for example, right here, right? One of the things I love most is to add what I lovingly call linear details. So I'll take a more contrasted, a more intense color, and depending on my mood, depending on the level of intensity, that will determine the color. Here I'm using just a blue mixed with a little bit of the ivory from my palette, that creamy opaque ivory. And I'm holding that brush. This is my number six travel round. I'm holding it perpendicular, and I will add some veins to the leaf, and I will vary the pressure and do things like this. And I will go outside the lines. And I find that this is just a fun way to build detail, to edge on a version of realism, but in a quick way, right? And I might do the same thing to my flowers. I'm going to grab a little bit of this red from Artistic Isles palette, and I will go and I will do some things like, and I'm holding this way far down towards the ferrule, just the tip of this brush. Gosh, does anybody else have this brush yet? And can I just get an amen on the tip of this brush? How amazing this tip is. Chef's kiss. And I might add some beginnings of cross hatching. Like, you know, you see those little lines on like a tulip that like curve up the edge of a petal. I might add some of that. And I might also go in with some stronger press, drag, lift, and wiggle motion, just to add some detail. Like go in where two petals meet one another and add a little bit of darkness, like notch out a little bit of darkness. But just notice how just adding some of this linear quality into the petal starts to pull together a single layer watercolor very quickly and effortlessly. Now they've got this like amoeba-like shape, bud, petal, whatever it is. And I can do the same thing. I can kind of make this more specific, turn it into something by adding some of that like linear detail, right? And this is kind of the hallmark of my personal style that you're going to see most from me. So I'm a big fan, right? That's pretty. Makes it look like a little flower bud that's just starting to open. It's a little dark, but you know, I work it back a little. Blot and lift. Nice. Similar to what I did here though, so it works. But yeah, that's how I would add detail. You can also do it with a liner brush if you want even finer detail. Grab that liner brush, maybe a lighter green, and add some to these down here. And you can get really fine strokes with this liner brush. That's how I would do it. Love it. All right, friends, I'm going to take one more question. Do I paint animals? I do. We're going to take one more question after this one. I'll show you some of the simple animals that I've done. I don't do realistic animals, maybe someday, but I do cute things like these guys, do little sharks. This is a whole video. You can go check it out where I was sketching with my watercolor brush and then turning them into these little paintings. I did the little unicorn. That was fun. I just happen to have these right at hand here. My little fox. So yeah, I do some of these cute little whimsical type animals. Do I have any others here? I think that was it. Butterfly. I guess that's an animal, but anywho, yes, love it. All right, last question of the day, friends. Get into comments, show some love. Last chance here to give this video a like, a boop, and all the things. Are your palettes going to be available in the UK? I am told by some that they are available in some areas, apparently not all areas. I actually did get an email the other day from a representative at Amazon that wanted to help me out with some of my international supply chain issues. So we're looking into that. We're always working on that. I will take one more technique question. Go ahead and get your last questions in there. And friends, don't hesitate to put your questions in, even though I may not answer it, because there are many talented people in this community and they may answer it for you. Does temperature of water matter? Fantastic question. I have found that wetting my palette, especially if it's a palette that re-wets, that doesn't re-wet easily. Sometimes Winsor & Newton Professional doesn't re-wet as easily. A warm, very warm water can make a difference in kind of reactivating. But in terms of painting, general painting, no. I wouldn't paint with cold water necessarily, like ice cold water. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to make sense and doesn't seem right, but I never tried it. Actually, I painted with soda once with Diet Coke and there was ice in it and it didn't affect anything. So no, it really doesn't. It could help you, like I said, reconstitute your paints before you start. But yeah. Oh, friends, this was such great fun. Let me know if we should do it again. I think we should. I think it's good stuff, but you have to let me know. And be sure to check back in the description. Hi. Oh, that's my face. That was a lot of my face. Be sure to check back in the description. We're going to pop in the links of any of the videos that I reference here today. And yeah, this is just good time, good fun. All of the supply references are going to be in the description as well. So if you're curious about my palette, my brush sets, my travel brush, you're going to want to head there. All the links are going to be there for you. And then also the best way to know about anything that we have coming up. We have some launches coming up. I'm going to be launching my Patreon. If you're watching this team replay, I may have already launched it. Yay! But if you want to be the first to know about any new product launches, you want to get on our email list. I call it our never annoying email list because we don't send out emails very often. So that link is also in the description below. Friends, I thank you so much for being here with me. And until next time, I wish you so, so much joyful, gleeful, is that a word? I don't care. You know what I mean. Happy painting.